What the hell is up, guys? This is Jose Garrison. You're watching No Way Jose. You can find me on No Way Jose YouTube channel, all the major odd podcasters and Odyssey as well. Normally, how this works, you guys are here today. No, this is clearly a live stream, but normally the way my content works, I will record it and then release it roughly about a week later. I say record, but it's actually I do a live stream for my patrons. If you want to look at that early, you got to be Patreon at patreon.com/NoWayJose2020. Lowest level's $2. That gets you the early episodes. The highest level's 20 if you want to go so far as being a sponsor. My sponsors are Mikkel Thorpe of the Expat Money Show. Also has Jeremy, who has an Etsy store, etsy.com/shops, just raising liberty. You can follow him on Twitter at Jeremy Rhymes. And my co-host of Tower Gang, which is an offensive comedy podcast, not to be mixed up with the tenor of this podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Tower Gang Toad. Also have Zach Overacker at ZOVERACK on Twitter if you follow him. I also have Lindsay, or That Hanger. Actually, now she got nuked off TikTok, but she's that. Damn it. Lindsay OKC is what she is. She does she does a lot of OKC content on TikTok. Glad someone's doing that because I have zero desire to be on TikTok, but some people like that stuff. So, whatever. If that's your thing, go check it out. She's doing good content there. I've checked it out. Also have Matt, and all he ever said he wanted me to say was he reps the 219 and raise hell, praise Dale. And I also have my buddy mutual on Twitter at AbrogateDees. With that, we've done enough grifting. Actually, one more thing. Make sure you go to TopLobsta.com. Use Jose check out for 10% off. You can get my Terrence Cheeky Didn't Kill Himself shirt. And my buddy, it's so aptly, Tyler Yankee over at Libertarian Podcast Review said Jose didn't kill himself. Yes, if I do wash up dead somewhere under weird circumstances, I didn't kill myself. I just want to let you guys know that. And with that, let's get our guests in here and do our Royal Rumble of our trans rights under attack. This is going to be nasty, guys. They're going to get into it. Actually, I don't know. I think we'll have a good, fair discussion. I've seen, I know Dave can do both, and I've seen Charles Koch or other guests, Koch or Koch, I don't fucking know. And he's very, very, very. I think he's pretty fair. I think he's argues in good faith, but we'll see. We'll see how this goes. Let's bring in our first one, Davey. What's up, my man?
What's up, brother? How are you, man?
Good. You ready to debate an anonymous Twitter avatar?
Yeah, but that's hey, for the record, I never argue like you said I can do both, but as long I always go respectful. People are respectful, and I think our friend Charles here is that type too.
Yes, I do too. I think a lot of people are expecting a drag out fight. I don't think that's what it would be, but I don't know. Either way, whatever. Good content for me. If you guys want to argue, make it nasty.
You're just trying to get your views up, Julie. If you guys want to just like go crazy aggressive, do it.
Yeah, I'm just gonna whisper insults. Hope that maybe you guys think it was the other one. All right, Charles, you're gonna go ahead and introduce yourself because I know the audience may not be as familiar with you. I know most people know Davey. Go ahead, bud.
Yeah, I'm Charles G. Koch of Wichita, Kansas, and I am honored to be here. I am a libertarian in the left-wing radical tradition of Lysander Spooner, Murray Rothbard, Karl Hess, Sam Konkin, Dana Rohrabacher, so on and so forth. And I'm just really honored that Dave is taking time out of his day to argue with a cartoon Wolverine in a suit. And one day I'm going to take my grandkids to the Dave Smith Presidential Library, and I'll be able to say, hey, I kind of knew this guy.
The effect wears off after time, once you get to know him. I'm just kidding. I love Dave still. But
very good.
But yeah, you guys ready to get into it?
Yep, sure.
Yeah, we're doing I'm gonna let Charles kind of lead the way because as we were talking before, it's kind of an open-ended question. Like, what do you even mean? So I figured it's only fair. Let Charles take the lead. He's kind of in enemy territory here. Also, we know Dave's record when it comes to debates. So,
well, if you're having a debates on trans rights and it starts out with a plug for Tower Gang, yeah, you've come into the lion's den. So nothing but respect to you, Charles, if that is your real name.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, yes. Charles. Yeah, go ahead.
So, I guess first I do want to say I am a little bit more optimistic now than I was even a couple weeks ago on this issue, just because the court seemed to have been being, to me, startlingly good. But nonetheless, I think certainly like there's the question of how successful will the attack ultimately be? But then the question, are they under attack? I think it's pretty straightforward. Yes, in terms of trans rights, and by that I mean the kinds of rights that libertarians should have reason to care about, just applied to trans people. So first of all, we talk a lot about the bans on gender affirming care with like kids, but it is worth noting that a lot of these bans are attempted bans are going well beyond just like what anyone would call a kid. They're kind of using a your brain doesn't fully develop till you're 25 type excuse in a lot of these states to push bans that go up to 26. Notably, some of the even the ones of those that have passed end up getting knocked down by the courts so far, which is part of what I was saying at the beginning there. But it is very much the case that they're trying that by they I obviously mean the concerted effort to push these kind of laws have been trying to push it as far as they possibly can. Obviously, the stuff with kids is a lot more politically popular, but it's going as far as it possibly can. There have been also, by the way, I'm just kind of trying to hit some bullet points here because there are like 170 laws that were proposed just last year relating to trans people, and then 180 so far this year relating to trans people. So it's hard to really like go through and seriously dig in deep with any one of them. So I'm just hitting some bullet points. Very happy to talk about any of them further. So again, serious attempts at going up to 26 years old, sometimes using existing laws in kind of fishy ways. So in Missouri, there was an attempt to use consumer protection acts, things like that. Also, not all of the attempts here have been directly just a bill that says we're banning care. So, for example, in Florida, so like 80% of trans people were getting their hormones, etc., from nurse practitioners, and they banned nurse practitioners from being able to prescribe and administer, etc., and get people hormones, things like that, which functionally bans it for like 80% of trans people. And then they put a pause on it, on any change in dosage for people, even with like a normal, like a full MD doctor. So there's that. There's also kind of like indirect workarounds. So, for example, in Oklahoma, there's an attempt to ban any medical establishment that's taking any kind of federal money from doing various kinds of like trans care, which obviously libertarian, like federal money, you don't want that in the first place. But as we all know, with the way that they raise the drinking age in Louisiana, there's ways of like tying federal funding to things and making through kind of indirect bans. There's also the drag bans that are typically phrased in such ways that places where a minor could be present doesn't even need to actually have a minor present. Just the fact that a minor could be present is enough. It's a live question, I think, whether this functionally bans certain kinds of like pride parades, right? It'll be interesting this month to see how that goes through. There's also stuff like the Florida bathroom bill, where functionally anybody can, if they decide that someone doesn't seem like they're a cis person of the relevant gender, that they can just get the cops to come and pull them out of the bathroom and submit them to very humiliating genital checks, more or less, to see if they are like who they say they are, and on the understanding of the person who is pulled the cops over to come look at them. So there's that. And then obviously the biggest assault here, which is the biggest, there's obvious reasons for this, but the biggest assault here has been on trans kids and their parents. And I want to emphasize, and their parents, that the extent to which this is framed in terms of parents' rights is very much instrumental to whatever seems to do the most damage to trans people. So in Texas, for example, there was lawless order. I don't know what else to call it than that. It's not even a change in the actual law, just an order claiming that existing child abuse law criminalized the basically people allowing their children to transition to the extent that kids do transition, and not only that, to put it in jeopardizing their relationship with their cisgender children as well, because the thought is, well, if they're a child abuser, then you may as well get all the kids out of the house, right? And this has caused a big problems for a lot of people in Texas. There's also the bill in Florida that is almost certainly unconstitutional, and so I'm pretty optimistic about this. But the idea is that if there's parents divorced, etc., and one is in some state where their kid would be allowed to start taking puberty blockers or whatever else, and there's a parent in Florida that they can have an emergency order to take the kid away from the parent they want to be with and bring them back to Florida. This seems pretty obviously bad for a lot of reasons. And then there's also the law in Florida requiring schools to basically out trans kids to their parents and gay kids as well, to not allowing them to accept the kid's own gender description, etc. And I could go on, but I won't, because I've already been talking for quite a bit. But I do think also it is worth saying that, and I'm very happy to talk more about it, but including the bans on actual gender affirming care, which generally speaking is not going to be which is not going to be surgeries for very young kids, but other kinds of care, but bans on that in all sorts of states, both Dakotas, Oklahoma, Alabama, etc. Very significant restriction of liberty to ban care that most mainstream medical associations that are not made up of political appointees tend to recommend. We can have all sorts of complaints about major medical associations that I'm probably going to agree with, but it seems like a good rule of thumb that if major medical associations say that something is good care, you should at least be allowed to do that. For a libertarian, it seems like that's pretty straightforward, that you don't want to be more restrictive than major medical associations. And I guess that's kind of where I want to end it. I will say it is worth noting that the main pushers of this are not primarily interested just in kids. So, for example, Matt Walsh has very explicitly said that he thinks that this should be that gender affirming care should be illegal at all ages. Jordan Peterson has similarly said things about criminal doctors for the very much an adult Elliot Page and his transition. I think we would agree that those are not fringe figures. Similarly, Michael Knowles wanting to eliminate transgenderism from public life. And I don't want to get into any kind of semantic argument about what that means, but at the very least, it does seem to say, does say wanting to eliminate transgender, to eliminate people being trans from public life, what exactly you wanted, or the wet method of doing that. If it's just banning care, that's still, I think we would agree, pretty extreme violation of liberty. Again, not a fringe figure. Being boosted by Matt Walsh, for example, being regularly boosted by someone who goes back and forth from being the richest man in the world. I think this is Elon Musk. This is a very serious push against trans liberty. Now, again, whether or not it's going to be successful, I am getting more optimistic that it's not going to be, but it's certainly the case that trans rights are under attack, and it's not, at the very least, not a foregone conclusion that that attack won't be successful. And I think it's important to talk about it for that reason, because these are pretty crazy, extreme, rapidly escalating, rapidly accelerating restrictions on kinds of liberties that I think any libertarian should care about, no matter what they think about trans people in general. So
All right.
that's just what I want to say.
Okay. All right. I'll let you take as long as you want, Dave. I think you have a little bit of advantage here because he threw a ton at you, so you can kind of hone in on what you want to, and we can go back and forth. I do want to remind people I will likely take questions towards the end. I would suggest super chatting because there's so many damn chats. It's hard to keep track of. I mean, if I see a good one, I'll try to remember. But I'd suggest giving me money if you want that. But
there might be an incentive issue there, but okay, sure.
A little bit. It's also it does make it easier for sorting questions. But anyways,
that is true.
Yeah. But all right, Dave, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, I don't know if it's an advantage to have so many things thrown at me because look, we can go through like kind of, it's tough to respond to every one of these proposals, but it does seem like what a lot of what's getting thrown at me is this law could potentially do this, and there's this proposal to do this, and this maybe in the worst case scenario, this could result in that. We can kind of dig down deeper into a little bit of this as we have this conversation. Let me try to zoom out a little bit and kind of give my take on this. Number one, I hate the term trans rights. And I don't hate that because I hate trans people. I just hate that it's in a set. I don't think libertarians should use the term. I think that in the same way, I'm very comfortable using the term gun rights because no one is confused about what that means. There is nobody in America who thinks if you say you believe in gun rights, that means that, I don't know, the government ought to provide you with a gun or something like that. I would not advise libertarians say, I believe healthcare is a human right, even though in a sense we technically do, but you're going to give a false impression. And about 95%, probably more than that, of people who use the term trans rights are not referring to what libertarians mean by rights. They're referring to all types of positive rights. And I think that even though you started by saying, well, I'm just talking about what libertarians mean in terms of rights, you also kind of got into people who you say aren't fringe figures demonizing trans people and things like that. And when you ask people, it seems like this to me is what's really going on here is like there's these separate areas that almost have to be parsed out. And the major debate in the country right now is not over whether someone has a right to call themselves what they want to and live their lives the way they want to. And we can talk about what proposals have been enacted, but if we want to actually talk about how much that's been cracked down on, we can get into that. The major debate seems to be over children transitioning, over children having, as you referred to it, as gender affirming care, which I think is a ridiculous, misleading euphemism on the level of calling abortion, reproductive rights. It's like you're assuming your position is correct with the term, and obviously gender affirming care would be something different to lots of different people. I think that the idea of children transitioning in whatever way we want to, the different levels of that. I think there's discussions about bathrooms and women's sports and women's areas. To me, those are not in any way natural rights. And in fact, there's very strong arguments for why there should be rules against those, even from the anarchist perspective. But I think that this kind of reminds me, when you say trans rights are under attack or something like that, look, I'm an anarchist. Everyone's rights are under attack to some degree or another. I mean, like we live under the biggest government in the history of humanity. In a sense, like there's, I don't know, I had to get permission from my town to build a garden, to put a fence up around my garden. A stoplight is a violation of rights in some ways. Yes, I'm not saying there's absolutely no way that you could conceive of trans rights being under attack, but this kind of reminds me of a tendency from a lot of left libertarians who were like really appalled by, say, Ron DeSantis when he was banning private COVID restrictions, like banning private mask mandates and banning private vaccine mandates, which I think I would agree, and I think most libertarians would agree, is not consistent with libertarianism and is something we wouldn't support. However, I think it was Milton Friedman. He had this saying. It was something like, I think you're seeing the hole in the barn and missing the barn. Like, it's like there were these left libertarians who were like hyper focused on this overreach in his reaction. And it's like, okay, fine. But the real story here was the vaccine mandates to begin with and the mask mandates to begin with. And this is a reaction. Now, of course, left-wingers and right-wingers are all statists of different varieties. So none of them are ever going to come up with like a perfect response to the other one. But the real story here is that this transgender ideology is being pushed on the country in an insane way. And most of these state governments that you're talking about are trying to deal with that fact. I mean, one of the rules you brought up is that you have to inform parents before you just start socially transitioning their kids. I mean, I don't know what the problem from a libertarian perspective of that is. Then these are not like, this whole ideology that's being pushed on people is not coming from some organic free market. It's coming from like college universities, which are essentially a government program, whether or not they're directly funded by the government. The loans are all backed up by the government. It's coming from Hollywood, who I think, as we found out during COVID, is in effect the mouthpiece for the establishment. It's coming from the politicians themselves, from the big financial institutions, from the, you know what I mean? Like, this is, there's nothing about this that is like an organic uprising. And this is the reaction to that. I think that we can get into kind of, I almost think it's important to kind of get into like what we actually believe about this issue. But the idea that there's this now reaction to this crazy new trend that is different from anything else we've kind of seen that has exploded in the last few years, to say that, hey, children are now being like indoctrinated into this radical new view that we did not have in our society for my entire life, my father's entire life, my grandfather's entire life, all of this. And now there are these state governments that are trying to say, hey, what can we do about this? Like, can we in some way say that, like, yeah, kids are not like allowed to make irreversible permanent elective decisions until a certain age? Can we say that, like, oh, okay, yes, biological men can't come in and just destroy every women's sports record? To me, none of this is in conflict with libertarianism, and I don't see any reason why libertarians have to jump on this latest fad and go along with this modern religion that seems to demand more than any other religion in our society today. So that'll be my opening.
All right. I think it'd be appropriate, since we had 2 long openings. We'll do probably somewhere in the realm of like 5 minutes, and I'll try to cut you guys off if you do,
Sure,
for 2 more responses, and then we'll go more of like a back and forth. That feels appropriate. So, Charles, if there was anything you want to address in there, now would be your time. You have roughly 5 minutes. I'll cut in and try not to be a dick about it. Stop you at a good spot if you get to a little bit over it. But go ahead.
Yeah, so I do want to kind of reiterate, the things that I'm talking about are like actual laws, the actual uses of state force, not just the. I have noticed I have not really mentioned just the overwhelming transphobia as a force, except when I'm talking about the way in which that is feeding the push to criminalize trans care and things like that. When I'm talking about trans rights being under attack, the thing that I'm talking about is trans people's rights being under attack. Regardless of what other people mean by that, that's what I have in mind. And I do want to, I would highly recommend someone who is listening to the recording of this to go back after they hear me say this and listen to Dave's statement again, and try to like count the number of things that he mentions that are actual rights violations in terms of when he says, well, these state governments are pushing back against this threat, some kind of government push or whatever. And also concretely, what things that he pointed to are instances of actual government push in a way that he actually spells out how that is being done. I see no evidence that I think the way in which someone might think that this is that the great increase in people transitioning, etc., is a function of a government push is only if they're kind of aware of trans people as an issue over the last like 5 years maybe, and seeing, for example, schools reacting to a massive increase of interest among young people, things like that. I would love to see concretely why Dave thinks that this is being pushed rather than something that is following that. I also want to note the just total that the narrative in question here kind of relies on just minimizing trans people's agency over their own lives. And I mean literally like not seeing them as making their own decisions at a like really fundamental level. For example, talking about informing parents about whether they will be socially transitioning their child. Notice that the way that sentence is structured is as if the school is transitioning the child rather than the child is socially transitioning and the school is choosing to accept or not accept that. We wouldn't say, for example, in the 60s or 70s that the school is giving your child a black boyfriend to white parents or something like that. The question would be whether or not the school is accepting the interracial relationship or something like that. And I understand that a lot of parents are very hostile to the idea of their child socially transitioning, etc. But fundamentally, the decision being made is by the child themselves. The question is whether the school should be outing the child or whether the school can or cannot like passively accept the child's own agency. I just wanted to reiterate that. But again, I would love to hear Dave explain why he thinks that the libertarian position should be to be more restrictive on actual medical freedom than the mainstream, not politically appointed medical associations. Now, I again can think of great reasons to be against the major medical associations. The AMA itself is fundamentally a rent-seeking thing. But
you have about 30 more seconds. But
right, yeah. But at the very least, we should not be more restrictive than them. And again, I would love to hear some actual concrete things about actual violations of people's rights and government policy rather than just the vague sense of, holy shit, there's so many trans people now, which is respectfully what I more or less heard in Dave's opening statement.
All right. Perfect. On to you.
Okay, that might be what you heard, but I was just giving my opening statement kind of a broad view of this stuff. Okay, let's get into some more of the specifics. So yes, to be clear, I didn't say the libertarian position is to be more restrictive on these things. I think the libertarian position ought to be that there should be no restrictions on what adults do. Let adults make their decisions with doctors, and that's fine. And the libertarian position is also that college universities should be completely defunded. There should be no guaranteed loans. There should be no more state colleges. The American Psychiatric Association should be completely defunded. All of these things. I'm happy to live in a libertarian world and let the chips fall where they may. But let's get back to some of the things that you just said here. If you're asking why it is that I think that this issue is being pushed on kids, and it's not just kids who are themselves deciding to come out, it's because I'm living in reality. I mean, that's why. And this is a concerted effort. I don't know if you're like that. Charles, let me just ask you very quickly, and then I'll finish my thing. Do you have kids?
No, but I am probably significantly younger than you.
No, I mean, I'm sure you are, but I also was 100% aware that you didn't have kids from the statement you made.
Correct.
If you think that little kids are the ones who are like bringing this idea to their teachers that they don't have to have like a gender and that gender is fluid, this is there's been millions of dollars spent just in New York City on drag queen story hours, trying to kind of like insert this idea that gender is fluid into young children. They've had within New York City, I know this is also true in LA and San Francisco, they've done at public school these exercises where the black kids stand up on chairs and the white kids are told to sit down, and the black kids then tell the white kids about how they've been oppressed, and the white kids apologize to them. This transgender stuff is being led from the top down. It's not that all of a sudden, like third grade is just like third grade was when I was in school, and a whole bunch of the kids started telling the teachers, you know, I've been thinking about gender fluidity, and I don't actually identify as a boy. I think I'm something else. That's not what's going on here, dude. Like objectively, it is coming from the top down. These teachers, I know kids like in my family who in 7th grade algebra, they start the class by going around and asking them what their preferred pronouns are. And the problem, and this is why I ask whether you have kids, because I know Jose does, and I'm sure some of the people listening do. When you ask a young child about what they identify as, you're not just asking that question. You're giving them information. You're telling them that, hey, you can choose to be something completely different from what you are. And we're all going to be really interested in that if you are that thing. And that's going to give you like this extra specialness to you. This is what's led to the drastic rise in transgender kids. By the way, being transgender doesn't even mean what it meant a few years ago. This is nothing new. You said something about like, if you've only known about this for the last 5 years. Dude, I'm from New York City. I've known about trannies since I was 8. Like, this isn't anything new. There's been transsexuals and like since I was a kid, we all knew about them. You see them around and stuff. It's not a new thing. What's new is that this is now being celebrated, introduced at extremely young ages. And the question is like, to a population who largely doesn't want this introduced to their kids, is that something that we ought to just like either ignore, as you seem to be, or just pretend that this is somehow an organic, like bottom up movement? You know, by the way, transgenderism today doesn't even mean what a lot of people probably assumed, which would be like a man who wants to live as a woman or a woman who wants to live as a man. Today, it's like a chick in college, like some blonde chick who cuts half of her hair short and says she's a Zer and continues to date boys. It's literally just because we've made like kind of victimhood currency, and this is a way to get into like, I'm in the LGBTQAI plus whatever group. That's kind of what's going on here, at least for a large percentage of them. Now, I'm not even denying that there are people, and I've known a lot of trans people in my life. There are a lot of people who would have figured this out on their own and kind of like genuinely feel like they'd be happier living as the other sex. But there's also other questions involved. Like, look, this is a religion, huh?
It's a 30 seconds. Keep going. My bad.
Okay, so I'm just gonna say this is a religion, and it's a religion that's being pushed on kids. If any other religion like this was being introduced to kids, left libertarians would be completely against it. If Christianity was being introduced in the public schools the way this stuff is, you'd absolutely be saying this is a violation of the rights of the parents who don't want this. And let me just say this. I'll go a tiny bit over, Jose. Just give me a little bit. That there's
I'll allow it.
unlike some of these other religions, the demands of the transgender religion go so far and above. It's not only like, look, you could be an atheist and someone else could say, well, I'm a Christian and I prefer to be a Christian. But the Christian doesn't insist that you participate in their views. And this transgender religion is demanding that you agree that it's real. You agree that trans women are women. You agree that this can actually happen in any objective sense. And, I think libertarians, like I've said, we believe adults should be free. But I don't have to, give up my belief in objective reality. And that's one of the demands of this whole new thing that is absolutely being pushed.
All right, let's get into a back and forth. We let Charles set the tone at the beginning. I think it's only fair we start with Dave, whether you want that to be in the form of a question or however you want to start this conversation, that's up to you. Floor is yours, Dave, and a back and forth. So,
okay,
feel free to jump in where you can, Charles.
Sure. So let me ask you, do you think that it's wrong if transgender women aren't allowed in women's locker rooms, to compete in women's sports, to use women's bathrooms, whatever it might be? Do you think that's wrong? So let's say on that we'll probably both agree that on private property they can do whatever they want. So let's say in public spaces.
Yeah. So I do want to say the sports issue, I think, has a lot of moving parts that I am not personally well versed enough to have really confident answers. I have tend to have pretty tolerant priors on that. It seems like, for example, people point out, oh, this one trans woman did it extremely well, and then it's just but if you actually look at overall, there's quite a bit of trans women who don't do as well in women's sports. So I have pretty lax priors about that, but I'm not going to go. I'm not as confident on that question because, admittedly, there's a lot of moving parts to that discussion that I'm not as well versed on.
So you don't think it's wrong for there to be a rule to say that biological men can't compete in women's sports?
I think you're asking in principle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in principle, I am open to some kind of. I think it would be better. So suppose that the most the kind of empirical assumptions that would be the strongest for the case you're making are true. Suppose that's true. I'm
not making any empirical assumptions, for the record.
Oh, well, I mean, obviously you would have to, because if there's no difference between trans women and cis women, then there's obviously no issue.
That's not an empirical assumption.
Yeah. Well, why would it not be?
Biologically speaking, there's differences between men and women. I don't know what you mean by there's...
Okay, so it's an empirical assumption that, for example, that post hormones, etc., that there is still a significant difference in terms of the benefits of someone that they might have had from being chromosomal male, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's an empirical assumption. Maybe you think it's so obvious that it barely needs stating, but it is an empirical assumption. And so suppose that all of that is true. I still would not want it to be the case that I think it's still not ideal to think of it as men's and women's sports, because obviously then we would have plenty of men in women's sports and plenty of women in men's sports. And so
I don't think we'd have much of the latter.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I don't think we'd have much of the latter.
Well,
I haven't heard any stories about women going in and just dominating.
No, so it's funny you say that, because there is one case that sometimes gets thrown around. So I think I remember seeing a clip of Joe Rogan talking about this, and it's not clear he knew what was actually going on and what the case he was talking about. But a boy who was just cleaning house in the women's wrestling in Texas. I want to say it was Texas. I might be wrong about that. And it's true that it was related to trans athletics. And it's true that it's a boy in women's wrestling cleaning house. What people didn't seem to realize, who were sharing the story, and I'm giving Joe Rogan the benefit of the doubt here, this is true of him, is it was a trans boy who was cleaning house in women's wrestling because he had male hormones, right? So no shit that he's going to be doing that well in women's wrestling. He did not want to be in women's wrestling. He very much wanted to be in men's wrestling. He was actively, his parents were actively like suing the state trying to
Yes,
make that
right. So you're saying this is a biological girl?
a chromosomal female, yes. And
okay.
and it was and he
So a woman who was on testosterone was fucking up all of the other chicks. That's what you're telling me?
I'm telling you that a chromosomal female, a trans man, a trans boy.
I'm sorry. Honestly, I'm just getting confused by how many times we're saying this. Can you just agree? Even if you don't want to call this, you're just a biological woman or you started the gender they were assigned at birth is female. She's on a bunch of testosterone and she's fucking up other chicks. That's the story.
And she very much wanted to not be.
It almost seems like testosterone is a huge advantage in sports.
Exactly.
That's why it's banned in cage fighting.
No, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah,
but this is not
my point.
Making the point you think it is, man. This is not making the point you think it is.
Again, it's very funny that we're talking about this since I explicitly said that I am more agnostic on this question. But the exact point you're pressing on here is why I am agnostic rather than just agreeing with you, which is that once you actually have had hormones, that's going to significantly change a lot of the things we care about now.
But here's why it's interesting to ask these questions, because it does kind of get
to see the point I'm making.
Yes, I do. Okay. I don't think you get the point that you're making. And like respectfully, it gets into some of these priors that I think a lot of people bring into these conversations. And so look, obviously, if there's a man who's suppressing his testosterone, or if there's a woman who's injecting herself with testosterone, no one's arguing that isn't going to have a huge effect. What's interesting is that you can recognize the effect that has. Like you can recognize that, say, a biological man who's now on estrogen is going to have a not fair competition with other men. But you can't recognize that someone who's been a biological man their entire life and then at 22 transitions isn't going to have an enormous advantage over biological women in sports. It's the same principle you're using, but such a larger gap. I mean, just take this to its logical conclusion. If LeBron, like, what does it even mean to be trans? You identify as it, right? So tomorrow, LeBron James says, I'm a woman. You see no issue with him competing in women's sports? Are we going to pretend like it's?
I'm really confused about why we're talking about the issue I said I'm most agnostic on.
Because you then went on to make a bunch of points about it that I think led to this place. I think, like you said,
I was just clarifying why I was agnostic.
Because I want to ask a little bit about your but I think your clarification didn't make sense. Look, I want to ask a little bit about the priors because I think this does matter. I think that there's an interesting dynamic here where a lot of times libertarians, particularly of the left libertarian variety, will say that there are these kind of discriminatory policies. But in reality, what it comes down to is you're saying the real question here is like, should transgenderism be accepted? Should everyone be operate under the view that you are the opposite sex now, that this is a real thing, that a boy can become a girl or a girl can become a boy or a girl can become a Zer or whatever the newest term that we're just making up is. And then there's the other side of us who are saying, no, look, there are biological realities in the world. And so, in the same sense that no one would argue that, or I don't think you'll argue, do you think it's at all controversial or wrong that there are men's and women's sports or men's and women's bathrooms or men and women's locker rooms? Like, is it wrong that just me as a man who doesn't identify as a woman, that I'm not allowed in a woman's locker room? Is that a violation? Is that something that you're agnostic about? Or is that something that you go, no, that completely makes sense? That like if you go down to a government, whatever, you're not allowed in the woman's locker room.
Yeah, that makes sense to me decently enough. But I do want to note really quickly, there was one thing in your reply statement that I did want to say something about, which you said again here just now.
Sure.
Which is about whether or not it's forcing people to accept trans people or whatever, however you would want to phrase that. I don't know exactly how you would want to phrase that. But I mean, there is a sense in which we force people to accept other people's religions in a very minimal sense, which is we don't go around calling Muhammad Ali Cassius Clay all the time, right? We call him Muhammad Ali. And people who are very atheist will still introduce a priest as father whatever, right? Those are kind of like minimal things about people's self-identification that we accept. Similarly, people who are not Catholic, nonetheless, they might have some reason to have like it might make sense for them to want to get a priest to come talk to someone in a given case, like if they're on their deathbed or whatever. Now, are we forcing them to say that they really believe in God with that? No. And there's all sorts of other contexts in which it makes sense that regardless of what you think, at the end of the day, that the social reality of how people are actually living their lives matters quite a bit, regardless of what you think about the way they're living their lives.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
in
I don't disagree
social
with that.
reality, just really quickly,
Sure.
really quickly, overwhelmingly, it's the case that, for example, if trans women are forced to use men's bathrooms, that they're going to be at significant risk. And there is realistically extraordinarily minimal risk, to a point that I myself was shocked by when I first started really looking into this. I, as someone with pretty much exactly the same priors that I have right now, honestly assumed that you would have a lot more cisgender men abusing trans-friendly bathroom policies than there actually is. Whenever you try to look for these cases, they're unbelievably difficult to find. And even the ones you see getting passed around, you look into them for like 15 seconds, and it's just clearly not the kind of case that the person is pointing to. And so that kind of social reality, it's insane to me to not factor that in thinking about what bathrooms people should be using. That as a reality, having trans women using women's bathrooms just does dramatically decrease the risk of people being in serious danger. And so that I don't see how you
I
don't
doubt
factor that.
it's dramatically decreases. I think there's probably very rare that on either side there's really an issue with violence with the bathroom. But that's not been my claim. That like this is now. I would say that we're embarking on a kind of bold new experiment here, and what is going to happen in the future. I wouldn't be particularly concerned with bathrooms. I think there is a legitimate concern in prisons, and there's actually been several cases now where men are trying to identify as women in order to get sent over to the women's prison, even in some cases where they've been sent over there. Look, I don't know, probably not in large numbers, but it'll be interesting. I mean, if we set this precedent, then there's no reason why every, like that this won't kind of open Pandora's box. But there's something kind of interesting there that it's not analogous to say calling Cassius Clay Muhammad Ali is the same thing as changing your pronouns, because there comes along with it a different assumption. It's not just, it's not that you're just asking someone to call someone by their pronouns, which, by the way, most people do. Even the most hardcore kind of like right-wing people, most of them in like social situations will call someone by their pronouns. Perhaps not if that person's being a jerk to them. It's different to say.
Just quickly,
well, hold on. Let me just
agree
finish
that
this.
person would be being a jerk.
It depends on the context of that. But yeah, if completely unwarranted, sure. I tend to think that would not be nice. Yeah.
Okay, good.
I mean, like if that person would like kind of started with you in some way, there might be a context where it's appropriate. But yeah, generally speaking, that's what I do. Like I call people by their preferred pronouns or how they present. I find it, I will say there's several caveats to it. I find it a little bit different. Like when sometimes there'll just be a guy with like a full beard in a dress and you're like, I don't know, you're not presenting well enough for me, but whatever. That's my own choice. But a name is a social construct. Cassius Clay was just chosen for Muhammad Ali, and then he chose a different name. And the claim of transgenderism is that also your sex was just assigned at birth, like as if a doctor just arbitrarily decided which one of my kids was a boy and a girl. Okay, but so that's a very different thing. Quickly, it's not true. That's based on objective reality.
Yeah. So regardless of that, you've agreed with me that the social reality is that trans women are not realistically going to be a danger to cisgender women in women's bathrooms. And if that's the case, then doesn't it seem like a pretty egregious violation of trans women's liberty and trans men's liberty in a similar and relevant other case, even though that's not what we talk about as much? But isn't it a pretty egregious violation of their liberty to say that somebody decides that they don't like this person who they're not getting a good sense of whether they're a cisgender woman or whatever in this bathroom? They can go call the cops to come pull this person out and inspect their genitals. Doesn't that seem like a pretty egregious?
Yes, that. Okay, so no, I do not think it's an egregious violation of their liberty.
Why not?
I do. Well, let me just finish my sentence. Because like what you just said, if they called the cops and came and inspected their genitals, yes, I would say that's an egregious violation of their liberty. Do you know of one case in the country where that's happened?
Yeah. So if you look at the.
But it's a yes or no. It's a yes or no. Has that ever happened?
Okay, so I haven't looked into the case itself, but I at least
the answer is no. The answer is no. There has never been a case because every trans activist. Hold on. Every trans activist would lead with this every single day. If once ever a trans person had been pulled out of a bathroom and had their genitals inspected. So yes, I agree with you that this hypothetical that has never happened would be an egregious violation of their liberty. Now, I don't think there'd be a big problem in terms of violence if the trans were allowed in the bathroom of their choosing. I also don't think there'd be some like crazy uptick in violence if men were allowed in women's bathrooms. But that's not really the question here. The question is whether we're talking about men's and women's homeless shelters, or we're talking about men's and women's sports, or we're talking about men and women's bathrooms. We all accept that there's discrimination there. We discriminate against men and we discriminate against women. We say there's one place for you and there's one place for you. And generally speaking, within reason, we all kind of accept that. And the question is why? Why do we accept that? Why is it that we keep men out of women's shelters? Is it because they identify as men? No, it's because there's biological differences between the sexes. That's why there's that's why there's men and women's sports. That's why it's because of biological realities. And how you identify does not change those biological realities more than if. Sure.
So it's crazy that it does, though. It like observably in terms of the bathroom stuff and the shelter stuff is that you do not see, for example, people abusing trans-friendly policy to get at, like, you don't see cisgender men abusing those policies to get at women. And if that's it, so it's you keep pushing this. Well, there's biological.
But that's not the point I was making.
All right, go ahead.
No, real quick, I just want to say I'm gonna let this go.
I'm not saying men will abuse the policies. I'm saying why is it okay that we discriminate on this basis? It's a completely different statement. And the point is that what you're the ask here.
It's okay because there's actual dangers to people, and when there's not actual dangers to people, then it's not okay.
I'm not saying it's okay. I'm not saying this has anything to do with dangers to people. My point, the truth is the dangers in terms of the bathroom thing is very low to begin with. It's almost like it doesn't even register statistically.
By the way, the Florida bill, I looked it up. It does in fact allow for genital exams. So just to be clear.
I'm not saying, I never even said the bill doesn't allow. I'm saying, has this ever once happened was more or less my question. There's laws on the books in every single state of this country that allow for all types of crazy shit to happen. But I wouldn't necessarily say those people's rights are under attack if it's never actually happening. But the point that I'm getting at here is that what the ask is that for if someone identifies as something, we all ought to treat them as that thing. And that's like the thing that's kind of different here. Like, why is it? Look, do you believe like trans women are women? Do you like believe in that statement?
Of course.
Okay, and that's because they identify as women.
Yes, more or less, yes.
So before they've done anything, before they've had any hormone therapy or puberty blockers or transition surgery or anything like that, if you just decide you're a woman, you're a woman.
Yep.
Okay, I'm a woman. Do you consider me a woman?
Okay, well, actually, when you say decide, so I think that gender is actually like an extremely complicated thing.
I'm a woman. I'm a woman.
Yeah.
Do you recognize me as a woman?
No, because you're clearly making a point.
So you can lie.
Yes.
So someone could claim. Ooh, okay. So someone could claim to be trans and not be.
Say that again.
So someone could claim to be a woman and not be. Okay. Correct. So just claiming you're a woman is not enough.
It doesn't really happen. Go on.
It just happened. What do you mean it doesn't happen? So I'm not a woman. You're denying me. I'm a trans woman. And you're saying I'm not a. You understand the point I'm making here.
I'm curious if you can explain to me why this is not a persuasive point to me.
But well,
I'm not sure if you're getting my point about why this is not okay.
You haven't made a point about why it's not persuasive. You said that trans women are women and all that.
Right.
You said that the determining factor is what they identify as.
The reason this is not a serious issue with the bathroom thing, because it's not just a cisgender man saying I am a woman and then going into women's bathrooms. That's not what we observably see.
I agree.
And so the Dave Smith saying I'm a woman thing is not like realistically relevant to the actual.
No, but I'm not. I wasn't arguing about the bathrooms anymore. I'm getting into kind of first principles here. You're saying trans women are women, and that the characteristic is that they identify as that. And then I'm telling you, I identify as that.
So I think that. So notice I said more or less. I actually think that gender is an extremely complicated thing. I think you can lie about it. I think you can be mistaken about it. I've known people who are mistaken at it in different ways at different times.
So not all trans women are women.
No, all trans women are women, but the question is whether or not
this is the Matt Walsh thing. You can't define the most simple terms, and then we're supposed to have a debate over all of this.
So here's what's so annoying to people who are trans friendly about the Matt Walsh thing. So suppose that you asked a random libertarian, what should we do if, say, there was a pandemic and it was like 200 times worse than COVID or whatever, right? And then you could edit together footage of that person kind of talking at long amounts of time. And you could comically make it like so you're showing the passing of time of how long they're talking, or maybe they'll say a lot of dumb things because that is a very hard case. And meanwhile, some normie, what they're going to say is, you lock everything down, right? Really easy for the normie, the non-libertarian. But obviously, there's all sorts of reasons why we can rule that out, why we know that's a wrong answer, even though the right answer is going to be extraordinarily complicated. Similarly, the answer that chromosomal males are biological males are men and vice versa with women, that's a really simple, straightforward answer. It sounds really confident, but there's a lot of good reasons to rule that out. And so the person who is trying to explain why they don't accept that answer is going to sound like the libertarian answering what to do in a 200 times worse than COVID pandemic.
I don't actually,
even though they're actually in fact right.
I don't think the answer is actually that tough. I mean, the answer would be something like, look, even with COVID, people in the first few weeks were quite happy to like be overly cautious. And if it was 200 times worse, you wouldn't need a mandate because everyone would lock themselves down. I had a little kid at the time. I'd be up in a Ruby Ridge setup in the woods somewhere if it was 200 times worse. But anyway, this is all kind of dodging the very basic question. The difference is that I wasn't asking you a complicated question. I was asking you a very simple question. And you're saying that the criteria for trans women being women is that they say they identify as that. But then we clearly demonstrated that just them saying they identified isn't enough.
So here's the other thing. The question of what is in fact the answer of what in fact is someone's gender is a separate question from what is, given how complicated of a thing gender is, what is the way that we should socially, externally, outside of that person, treat as someone's gender? What should we treat as someone's gender for purposes of classification, for purposes of divided spaces, etc., etc.? That's a very different question. That I think you're going to have the much more straightforward identification answer.
Yeah, but again, look, the idea that you can transition, the idea that gender is this very complicated thing, that gender is removed from sex, it's not an argument. It's it's almost like all of the trans activist types, they assume they've already proven their case, and they just go, well, gender, we all know gender is different from sex. The point is that
I
no,
haven't
we
given
don't
the
all
argument.
agree.
That's different from saying that there is no argument, right? And
Okay,
I thought
fine. You haven't given the argument. Okay, fine.
Yeah, but the question
fine,
is
but
about
let me just, all right, fine. So let me just, well, then you're starting with the conclusion rather than actually presenting an argument. But either way,
it would be if the argument was, are trans women women, but the argument is, are trans people's rights under attack? And I think you can
okay, well, then no, those are different
totally
questions.
Anti-trans and still think that yes, they're clearly under attack.
By the way, I'm not anti-trans. I'm not like against trans people. I'm not against like really any group of people other than like violent people or awful people or something like that. I'm just saying, like, no, I don't believe that being a man and a woman is malleable and you can decide to be one or the other. That's not like being against that group of people. I just believe in objective reality.
I do,
like,
as well, to be clear. I'm
real quick. I'm gonna let you get the final word on this, Charles. But I want to divert this to a slightly different aspect, because I think we're probably going to go in circles here when whether Dave is a lady dick or not. So, Charles, I'll let you get the last word. I want to refocus it, I think, into a little bit more of the crux of the issue here, and then we'll get on to
just really quickly.
questions.
I do want to reiterate. I recommend anyone who is listening to the recording here go back. Try and, as a game, count the number of things Dave talks about that are actual government policies, that are actual question about rights versus the amount that I'm talking about.
We'll get to that in my question.
Fine, but if you want to say that, then I'll say go back and listen to the amount of times that Charles can't answer my basic questions, because I'm trying to figure out what our priors are here.
I do recommend that too. And the last thing I'm going to say is, so you said, I'm not saying to be more restrictive than the AMA, but if you do think that children's gender affirming care should be restrictive, or that that's like an open question, then you are necessarily more restrictive than the AMA and other major medical associations.
What I was saying is that I don't think okay, now you're talking about children. And again, like I say, gender affirming care is this nonsense euphemism. So like, let's talk about what we're actually talking about. Like in the same sense that it's like, don't tell me you're talking about reproductive rights. What are we actually talking about here? If you're talking about if you're talking about government employees starting referring to someone's son as a girl every day in school and not telling their parents, that should be against the fucking law. And that should be anyone who, why should a government employee not get to like make intimate, confusing decisions about how your child's childhood goes?
Should a government employee be able to not tell parents that their child is dating a black boy?
I mean, okay, no, again, they're different things.
Why is that different? If it's
different? They should not be able to. They should not be able to keep a secret relationship away from their parents. Absolutely not. They should not. No, they should never. There should never be a situation. A government employee should never be allowed to say, "Hey, I know you're dating this boy who your parents don't want you to date, but I'm going to keep this secret for you. And in fact, I'm going to continue encouraging this relationship." No, and that person should go to fucking jail.
So your position is that someone should go to jail if they don't tell the Klan member parents that their child is dating a black boy, that they should go to jail if they don't tell an abusive parent, an abusive homophobic parent, their son has said that he is gay. That is your position. They should go to jail.
Okay, so if we're going to play that, then your position is that somebody who says like that they have a problem with their abusive boyfriend, their daughter is dating a guy who's beating the shit out of her, and they go, "You're not allowed to see her anymore." And then the teacher goes, "No, don't worry about it. I'm going to make sure you guys stay together, and I promise I'll never tell your parents about it." Your position is that that's fine. You see, we can both kind of use these extremes to pair our points. But now if we actually get back to the actual issue that we're talking about, yes, the idea that you're going to make a decision on behalf of someone else's child, that you're going to socially transition them, I'm fine with that being against the law.
All right, I'm going to divert this now because I think I want to get to the crux of it. And a lot of people brought up, Charles, yourself, you brought up how Dave hasn't addressed the different individual bills. I mean, think
there's a lot, so.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the crux of the issue here is, and we can kind of, I think the point I'm about to bring up will kind of address them all, essentially. So I think the issue here is, how do we treat public property? So, I mean, this kind of gets into hoppyism, which I know you're of the agorist camp, Charles, and I know a lot of them are, don't like that shit. I guess I'm a unique agorist in that point. I love Hoppa. and I think he has a lot to say about stuff like that. So I think it gets into the point because it's almost like I feel like there's this idea that you're trying to express that any laws whatsoever concerning public property is somehow like I don't know what your criteria is essentially. Like, so I guess I think you know what I'm getting at, Charles. I'll let you go, and then we'll do a little bit back and forth. Let's keep this like under 10 minutes, and so I can get into questions. But I think that's kind of the crux of the issue. What do we do with public areas? Should be no laws concerning anything whatsoever, or rules or whatever you want to call them? But go ahead.
So, and I'm not trying to divert the question, but I do want to note there's a lot of what we were talking about that doesn't have anything to do with that, like taking children from their parents, for example. I don't think children are public property, and so I don't think that that's a public property question. Secondly, though, I do think that the question of like what to do with public property is a very difficult one, but similar to the gender question, I think we can rule out the Hoppian answer pretty easily. Because it seems like that's going to have the like crazy conclusions. Like if everybody in Dave's Dave, you live in New York, right?
No, sir. New Jersey.
Okay.
I'm from New York, though. You're not
okay. Apologies.
Wrong. No,
if everybody in New Jersey hated Dave enough that he could only leave his house by helicopter because
I'm working on it.
Because otherwise he'd be using the public roads. Seems pretty clear to me that that is not a libertarian conclusion. I don't see how the Hoppian argument doesn't get to that conclusion. Why it's not just democracy the god seems to be the Hoppian argument there. So instead, what I would say is probably, I mean, what's the whole? This is going to be a long tangent, so I'm going to try and restrict this. I think the good basis for libertarian views on property in general is what people are like, the projects people are involved in and the non-aggressive projects people are involved in. So it seems like the use of public property should be the sort of thing where it's allowing people to do their non-aggressive projects as much as possible without being disrupted by other people and minimizing conflict. And certainly a law that allows people to call the cops over, whisk people out of the bathroom, etc., certainly disrupting someone's project of just trying to use the bathroom certainly creates a whole of a lot more conflict.
All right. So, I get this a lot when people take on the this Hoppian position on public property. And I got to say, I think this is like a real weakness that libertarians have. And I think part of it is because libertarians we're very good at kind of forcing things into these binaries when they deserve to be forced into them. Like private property versus public property, aggression versus non-aggression, kind of the statism versus, libertarianism. The problem is that when you get into the problem of public property, this doesn't actually follow. And the fact that you can do this kind of like reductio ab absurdum, they're useful to a point. But in the same sense that you go, hey, if I go, hey, I like to have some salt on my eggs in the morning, and you go, oh yeah, well, if you ate 10 pounds of salt, you'd die. It's like, yeah, but that doesn't actually disprove that I can't have some salt on my eggs. So look, if you reductio ad absurdum, this idea that like the will of the public is what ought to govern public property, or that it ought to be kind of simulated like a private business or something like that. Yeah, you can get to these absurd areas. Like no one likes me in New Jersey and I have to helicopter everywhere. The problem is that the other position, that there should be zero restrictions on public property, also gets you into some crazy areas. That also gets you into areas of the stuff of drug addicts walking into public schools, or everyone has the same right to go to a public university even if they never went to high school, they have a right to go there. Or it might get you into, say, like homeless encampments being built in every major city across America, making them unlivable for the families that are there. And so you find yourself in this place where like you have to apply the principle within reason and within ways that you think are somewhat consistent with what a libertarian society might look like. And so it's not so easy to just say, oh, one extreme or the other extreme is correct. And when you talk about just like, oh, someone's doing like a non-aggressive activity, I mean, I get your point. And in spirit, I want to be with you. Look, I don't want the government doing nothing to nobody. Like, I don't want the government to exist at all. However, like, someone technically, like, just like going and doing drugs in a playground is a non-violent, non-aggressive activity. But if it was a private playground, you know for a fact that shit wouldn't be tolerated, and that person would be asked to leave. And so when it's a public playground, I have no problem saying like, hey, we're going to ask you to leave. That doesn't mean this gets caricatured by libertarians all the time. Like, Dave's advocating calling the cops on homeless people, or I want them to have the shit beaten out of them or something like that. I'm just saying, no, I think that like the passed out junkie in the kids' playground, which by the way is happening. I'm not like speaking of some theoretical. I'm speaking of like an actual crisis that's going on in the country right now. And yes, I have no problem with that person being forced to leave. Now, I don't know exactly how we're like pulling this back into the transgender conversation, but within public property, there's no, I don't think any libertarian, even though they mock kind of the reductio absurdum of my position, none of them are actually willing to take the reducto absurdum of their position, which would be that there should be zero restrictions. We all, in one way or another, agree that, like, yeah, at a certain point, there's going to have to be some, because zero restrictions on any piece of
property. Just to be
property
clear, are you talking
is
about
not
my position
libertarianism.
or a hypothetical position? Because I'm not sure how this relates to what I said.
Well, because you used the reducto ab absurdum on my position. So I'm just saying.
Right, but my position is not the position you're doing reductio of right now.
Okay, so what is it?
So the one I just said, which is that the restriction should be of a kind that we are not disrupting people's you're not disrupting people's non-aggressive projects. So
no, but that's what I responded to. I said that. I said like non-aggressive. It's not.
Oh yeah. So okay, so maybe we're misunderstanding. Okay, so we're going to disagree a lot about the homeless encampment, homeless people cases in general. I don't think that's going to be a productive discussion. Okay. But I do want to register that I just very strongly disagree on that. But we do agree that, for example, that the answer is neither Dave has to leave by helicopter, nor is the answer that if some kids you're doing a normal reading with some kindergarten teacher in the library and somebody comes over and takes a shit in front of the kids. Neither of us think that that's like that's the right position either. I would say that they are disrupting a non-aggressive project, which is the story time, the normal library uses of that property. Yeah. Now, how that's going to get cashed out, extraordinarily complicated, very vague thing.
But that's the point, is that it's very arbitrary. This is the point. And I'm agreeing with you, by the way. I'm not disagreeing. But when you just say they're disrupting the non-aggressive activity, like you could also very easily make the case that homeless people shooting up and shitting on the streets are disrupting the non-aggressive activity of someone walking their daughter to the store. So then this just becomes, now we're just negotiating. We're not in pure libertarian principles.
That neither of us are accepting the Hoppian position, as far as I'm reading you.
No,
because that's definitely not the Hoppian.
No, this is the Hoppian position.
No, the Hoppian position is that it's majority taxpayer will, is my understanding.
No, he doesn't argue that for anything. He's saying that, like, look, if it's against his position is that you ultimately ought to kind of simulate like what we know this would be like in a private situation, and that if it's violating the majority's will, that this isn't something that libertarians ought to champion, and that it's completely consistent with libertarianism to have restrictions. In other words, in an anarcho-capitalist society, you could have as many immigration restrictions as you wanted to have. And what his actual argument is that the solution would be something closer to a sponsorship program or radical decentralization in immigration. So no, it's not.
I don't think. I mean, I think it's absurd to think that you would have anything other than pretty unrestrained open borders in an anarchist situation, given that observably people very much want immigrants to work for them, very much want to give them housing, etc.
Look, I remember arguing with I was arguing with one of the Mises Caucus guys, like people in my camp of this libertarian world, who's an open borders guy, and we were having a discussion about this. And I said to him at one point, I floated out, he had worked on, I think, a family farm, and they had immigrants who were like working on the farm. And I said, well, what about this Hoppian position where he basically says you have to sponsor the immigrant, you have to take full financial responsibility for them, you have to, you have to pay for their, you can't, like, none of their costs can
why,
be,
though?
Well, let me just
Sorry, go
finish this. So you're saying none of their costs can be imposed on the taxpayer. They can't go to an emergency room for healthcare. They can't send their kid to public school and impose their costs on the taxpayer. You have to take full financial responsibility for them, but you can then invite them here. And his response to me was, yeah, but if that was the case, we never could have financially afforded it. It wouldn't have been financially viable. And the point is, exactly. So you can claim you're inviting them, but you're only really like, you can claim that the market demonstrates that you'll invite them, but the truth is the market's only demonstrating that when so much of the costs are passed on to the taxpayer. So that's the Hoppian position.
Why on earth would you have to sponsor them be anything like what you would expect in market anarchy? That's very strange to me.
It's
I mean,
not
also,
perfect.
Look,
none of this
say
is
these
perfect.
same things about if you want to move, people move across town all the time because they want to send their kids to a better public school, right?
Sure.
And you don't, does someone have to sponsor you if you want to move across town to send your kids to a better public school? That's very strange.
Yeah, but
like, why would we think that a market would have to, that a market would require people sponsoring other human beings?
A market wouldn't require that. A market wouldn't require that. We're talking about within the context where a government does exist and what would be a preferable simulation that would be somewhat closer to the market. So listen, none of this is perfect, but the truth is that if you have someone in a community, right? The point is that the taxpayers who are forced to pay their higher premiums in healthcare because emergency rooms aren't allowed to turn people away, or have been paying property taxes for the last 20 years and are now all of a sudden someone just moves in and gets to send all of their kids to those schools, they have no say in this. Okay. And so the person inviting them is not just inviting them, they're also inviting them on behalf of all these other people. Now, the difference between that and someone who just moved across town is that, at least in theory, these people have also been within this like legal jurisdiction society for a long time and quite possibly have been paying in for many, many years.
Well, not in that case.
None of it's
schools
perfect,
are paid by property taxes, so they almost by definition would not have been paying into the relevant schools, right?
Well, no, I mean, like it depends on where you are or what jurisdiction I suppose that you're in. But like in my jurisdiction, like there's kind of like property taxes are basically shared around through all of these towns. But regardless, even if you're saying moving states, like it's just a slightly different situation. But no, look, in the only perfect answer here, at which Hoppe would agree with, which I would agree with, which I bet you would agree with, is an anarchist society. Like that's the only way you're going to have a perfect answer here. And once you have the government involved in this, it's murky. But the point is, it's murky your way or Hoppe's way or any other way. All of them are murky. It's also still murky that some immigrant, like, why is it not, like, I get the point you're making. Then the point you're making essentially is like that it's murky, and this isn't exactly what an anarchist society would be. But why the hell is it that 100,000 people just march over here and they just get to come in and immediately get access to roads and schools and hospitals and firefighters and police? All right, well, I'll count the police against them, but the other ones are good, you know. So like, why? What? That's also pretty damn murky. So that's the point. And in some ways, like, I think a lot of the left libertarians are almost like allergic to pointing out this other side of it. But I'm not allergic to pointing out the fact that you've got a point. Yeah. You've got a point. It's not perfect in that scenario either.
Yeah. All right, guys, let's move on to super chats. I had to. My autism's flaring. I haven't really jumped in this much, but I did have to address the one border point you made, Charles, on Hoppe. You said it would mostly be, or in a market anarchy type situation, we would have essentially open borders. I think maybe even there's a case to be made that maybe a majority of the nation would be that, but there would be places where that wouldn't be the case in a private property type situation. There would be, for whatever reason. Who knows? Maybe there's some.
You can come into my house.
Huh? Yeah,
you can't come to my house, sure.
Yeah, you can't come to my house, or if you have a covenant community to where you guys have come together under a system of private property and decided, hey, these are the rough rules that you have to agree to if you move here, and we don't want the X people here for whatever fucking reason, whether it's bigoted or not bigoted or justified. Who fucking cares? That's perfectly within your rights to do so. So I think it's like you're kind of right, sort of. I think there'd probably be a lot of open land where a lot of immigrant workers would be welcomed, and, you know, with basically almost no restrictions. But there'd be also areas, I believe Hoppe referred to them as like the high wage areas would typically be the areas that would be a little bit more guarded. But, you know, who knows? Maybe that would homogenize over time. I have no idea. We're not in Ancapistan. But generally speaking, the point is that under a private property system, there'd be all sorts of different rules and such that, it really just comes down to whoever owns it and what they want to decide. All right, let's move on. I have base Jew at $2. Trans minors don't exist. That is pretty base Jew thing to say. Feel free, guys, to jump in on any of these because a lot of these super chats do affect or do kind of like touch on it. I know we didn't hit on the trans minor thing too much, and then also he said, "I'm just giving you my money."
Oh, just quickly, I do want to say that just because I think this did get lost a bit. Very specifically, the thing that I was saying that Dave was more restrictive than the AMA, etc. on was on the question of trans minors care. Dave thinks that trans minors, even if they go on to say this is great, as the vast majority of them do, that even then they can't consent to it. Vast majority of medical associations say they do. Dave thinks no, the state should step in places where vast majority of normie, lib dominated, progressive dominated, medical associations are a lot more libertarian on. Actually, I don't know if they're actually
I don't think
but they're at least more status dominated.
Yeah, the idea that children can consent is not more libertarian. But I will say that I think that what I said, instead of you just telling people what I view, what my views are, I'll make it very clear. I think that socially transitioning people without their parents' knowledge it should not be allowed. I think that minors,
I just want to agree that no one should socially transition a child. The child should socially transition.
Yeah, but this is just living. This is just living in la la land. If you think these ideas aren't being put into into kids' heads, and let me tell you something. I mean, I know you don't have kids, but like. So the idea that this is all you think there just happens to have been an organic rise from kids.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Deciding.
Thing.
Yeah, so, no, I'm not.
I mean, just quickly,
you may have seen it.
I didn't want to say
the fact that you've seen it once means nothing, dude.
Hold on.
I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old, and I've seen it too, and it's exactly what Dave is describing. To say otherwise is to not understand children, and I'm sorry, it shows naivety and it's just fucking retarded. I'm sorry.
All right, so quickly, so okay, so anyway, so since Dave is doing the whole like I have kids, you don't type thing, I do want to say that I mean I have a very like kind of like this seems like a very boomer type like outsider view of what has happened, in that I have just seen people organically be trans in their youth much earlier than recent. So like the first time that I had a friend who came out as trans was like 2007 when I was in high school. And that is obviously well before there was remotely any acceptance of trans people. And at the risk of doxing myself, I'll say this was in Oklahoma. And so this is like pretty clearly not that just this is totally lib religion that is pervading all that makes people trans. No, people do organically know who they are. And
why are there so many more today than there were in 2007?
Because there was a significant uptake in acceptance.
You're begging the question.
In 2007,
it's bullshit.
Trans
there wasn't a
people
significant
are subject on Mari, right?
No, it's not. This is you're making this assumption. There's been a significant uptick in the acceptance. Also, there's been a significant uptick in us telling kids about these ideas. I'm not saying this has never once ever happened in the history of the world, but no, it is. This is being led from the top down, and that's what's leading to more of this. But I just want to make this clear because you kind of said what my views are. So yes, my views are that you should not be allowed to start socially transitioning a kid without their parents' knowledge or against their parents' will. My view is that minors should not be allowed. It should be illegal for them, for anyone to give them irreversible elective chemical castrating pharmaceutical products, that sexual reassignment surgery, all of that stuff.
That doesn't have
illegal.
You know that. Yeah, okay. I assume you're
very rarely
enough to know that this sex reassignment surgery is not a thing that's happening to young kids.
It's rarely a thing that's happening.
It's
not happening to young kids. It's rarely a thing that happens.
It's not a thing. Go on.
It's rarely a thing that happens to teenagers. It's not a thing that happens to young kids.
Okay.
But the hormone blockers and the puberty blockers and the hormone treatment are happening to thousands and thousands of kids every year. And yes, I'm completely fine with that being that not being allowed, that being illegal, whatever you want to say.
What would convince you that that was an acceptable? Well, yeah, I guess like what would convince you that the state should not be involved on that?
Real quick, I want to jump in. I just have to point out, Charles, that when we were talking about the initial example of trans kids, I feel like me and Dave were probably, colloquially speaking, of probably kids 14 and under. I feel like it's a little bit more nuanced when you're talking about someone in like high school.
Yeah.
But like you then, once we immediately brought up to like TR or like fucking hormone replacement or actual sex changes, it's almost like you then swapped and now you are colloquially operating under the 14 and under and like, oh, that never happens, when it's very clearly happening in the 14 above. So I don't know. That just came off as very disingenuous to me.
So I just want to be clear because there is, I mean, I'm sure you know that there's like a lot of people who have been led to believe that there's bottom surgery happening to like prepubescent kids, which is clearly not happening. And I just want to make that.
Yeah. No one made that claim.
No, I know. Yeah. I just want to make that clear. So,
sure. Okay.
So my claim here is just that the state should be at least as not involved as most mainstream medical professionals thinks that the state should not be involved.
Yeah, but this is just kind of an appeal to authority. Like, I don't know. I mean,
why should we be less libertarian than those authorities?
It's not because it's not less libertarian, actually.
Why?
Like saying because children can't consent. And so it's not it's not more libertarian to say I think an 8-year-old should be allowed to have sex. That's not more libertarian.
To say that children should not be able to receive any kind of medical treatment at all?
Listen, let me just make the point.
Is it not less?
It's not more. Listen, let me just make the point that I'm making. You're making this appeal to authority about why should we be more restrictive than these medical establishments. These medical establishments, I've hoped people have realized through the last few years, are statist constructs that get it wrong time and time again. And by the way, if you want to look throughout history, anytime that governments have gone horribly wrong, they're also accompanied by medical establishments that recommend really, really bad things. I just want to say, I agree with you. I said this earlier. We had best practices on how to torture people over the last 20 years.
Yep.
And let's not even get into the Nazi or the commie scientists and what they were all into. The truth is that it's not a question of whether we should be more or less restrictive. When we're talking about children, it's completely reasonable. We say that children can't have tattoos, they can't drink, they're not supposed to have sex, like all of these things. That's not like, these are far less important decisions than whether you're going to do something irreversible to yourself like this. And so I'm absolutely fine with there being restrictions on kids.
So I just want to be clear. The specific thing I'm saying is not that we should defer to medical establishments on all things, just that if there's a case that is somewhat controversial as this is in terms of the public at large, but it is not controversial at all among major medical establishments. And the major medical establishment opinion is that the state should not be involved. It's a very strange position for a libertarian to take, that we should think the state should be involved more than those major medical establishments.
Right. And I'm saying I don't think that's right. If the major medical establishments were okay with parents raping their children, and then I said like, no, actually, I think that should be illegal and the state should step in as long as we have a state. Would you agree with that? The argument is, but you're saying we should be less libertarian. This is such a weird position for a libertarian to be arguing that the state should do more than the medical establishment says.
Do you agree that all other things being equal, say we're not talking about trans kids, say we're talking about just normal medical procedures that are not trans related.
Fine, but what you're dodging right there, what you're dodging is that I just kind of wrecked the logic that you're trying to like put up here, that somehow it's less libertarian if you ever think the state should be more restrictive than the medical establishment says.
I'm saying that is a very strong reason to think that that's a problem, right? I'm not saying that so similar to what you're saying earlier, that I'm not saying that this is never the case, but it's a very good heuristic that you should at least think the state should be involved less in those cases. Now, not to say there's never a case where it doesn't go the other way, but at least the burden of proof would be that you're really making a strong claim if you think that the state should be involved more than the very statist medical establishment thinks.
Well, you're amending what you previously said now so that it doesn't contradict like the point that I made. But like, I don't know if I'm making
the point that you're making.
No,
sorry, the previous point you were making.
No, what you originally said didn't contradict the point I was making. But if you're going to change it to that I have to make a strong case. It's like, I don't know. I don't think the medical establishment is any type of barometer. I mean, 10 years ago, the medical establishment wouldn't have supported this. 20 years ago, they would have laughed you out of the room if you had mentioned this. I don't think there's any reason to think that what the medical establishment is saying right now is some type of gospel. And yes, I think child abuse should be illegal.
Probably false, by the way, but go on.
Okay. I think child abuse should be illegal, and I have no problem with anyone,
I agree with that.
Anybody who is in a position where they can stop it, where they have the might to stop it. I'm fine with them doing that. And yes, I consider allowing children. I consider allowing children to make elective, irreversible decisions before the age of consent to be a form of child abuse.
What specifically do you think is this irreversible decision that you should be able to that you should not allow them to be able to make?
Puberty blockers, hormone treatment during puberty, and anything like that.
Okay. What would change your mind on that? Like, what could possibly change your mind and to think this is actually like something that it makes sense to see as a like informed actual choice by the child of a kind that we should abide by, like any other medical choice? What would change your mind in principle, even if you think it's crazy to think this would ever be shown?
I don't know. It's an interesting question. What would change my mind to think that a child is capable of making a permanent, irreversible decision? I don't know. Maybe if we had the ability to time travel and they could go back in time and change that decision.
So what about just the fact, like overwhelming lack of regret from people who actually transition?
Well, the problem with that, the reason why that's not sufficient at all is that this is kind of a brand new experiment that's being run. I mean, if you look at the numbers in which this is being done, they are like exponentially increasing. And the truth is that much like studies with climate change or the studies with COVID, when you have these crazy politicized issues, and this is like the most hot button politicized issue out there right now, and you have these medical establishments, you don't just get good science. And the truth is that the biggest studies have shown that if there's no intervention, between 70 to 90% of these kids, when they're adults, end up living life as the sex that they actually are. It's not clear to me at all. It's not, you can say it is, but it's not clear to you either. It's really not clear to any of us what the result of this new like crazy fad is going to be in 10, 20, 30 years. And we're experimenting on a generation of children.
So to be clear, the thing that is different now than was the case a long time ago is not children transitioning. That is not what is new. That is absolutely not what is new. What is different is greater acceptance of trans people. Now,
No. You can go look at the numbers of puberty blockers. This is new. The number goes up every single year. And then we're doing it in much larger numbers than we ever were.
It is not new.
Puberty blockers, specifically.
No, that is not new either. But
the numbers are drastically increasing. Yes,
that's a different question. That's a very different question. To be clear,
no, it's not.
No. To be clear, children transitioning is not new. It is very old. If you are a conservative in the Burkean sense, you should want to maintain this standing tradition of something that has worked of children transitioning.
Well, fuck conservatives, and I'm not a conservative in the Burkean sense, but whatever. This is new, dude. This is a new thing.
I'm saying that it is you are looking at something that has been working for a long time and saying you want to overturn this thing because it doesn't make sense to you, from the outside rationalistically.
No, it doesn't. It hasn't been working, dude. This is just like, so listen, man, trans people, and this is changing now because, again, people who identify as trans, which is the point I was kind of getting at before when I said I'm a woman, and then like there's no real answer for why I'm not. But the truth is now, like I said, you have blonde chicks who identify as Zer and continue to date men who consider themselves trans. So this is like become a fad that isn't
so
like even. Hold on, let me just finish the point.
Trans people,
huh?
Trans lesbians have been a thing as long as trans people. I don't know why you.
Right. The point is that this isn't the same. It's not the same category as somebody who like wants to like transition their and live their life as the opposite sex. It's just a different thing. And because progressives have decided we lump this LGBTQ.
So here's one interesting.
No, let me just finish the point that I'm making here. Okay, this is like because this is a different topic. But to say that this is working out well, transgender people have, and I mean this traditionally transgender, not just the woman who just identifies as Zer. And I wasn't talking about lesbians, by the way. I'm saying a girl who continues to date men. They're now also considering themselves transgender. But I'm talking about like traditional transgender people, and even like people like, say, the anecdotal point you brought up, people back in 2007. I know someone who I went to high school with who now identifies as a man, who was a woman when I was in high school with her. The more traditional trans people, the truth is that none of these things have been a success. These people have very, very bad outcomes, and it's tragic. I don't wish that on them, but they're overwhelmingly, like, the suicide rate is like abysmal. Almost half of them end up committing suicide. The idea that we've found some silver bullet where if you do this, then it's so clear that life is better, even after hormones, even after surgery, the suicide rate is right around the same. And for us to pretend that we've found some success, and it's so obvious that if any teenager says they think they're the other sex, or even any 6-year-old or 7-year-old says that the correct answer is to start socially transitioning them, is just not true. It's not borne out by the science. And it's become a political issue now where, and of course, as you saw with the COVID stuff, a lot of doctors fall right into that, disappointingly. But it's not actually true that this is scientifically sound. And in the same way that idiots like me and Jose Garrison were more right over the last 3 years than the scientific community when the biggest scientific crisis of our time came around, I'm not just deferring to them on this.
Here's a case again where you want the government to be involved more than that scientific community.
That's irrelevant. We're talking libertarian ethics for some arbitrary medical decision.
Yeah, completely irrelevant.
Yeah, so, I mean, but it's not an arbitrary. Okay.
It's basically arbitrary at this point.
The whole thing.
All right, we got to move on. We're beating a dead horse. We went from no one is coming after kids, trans kids are under attack, and state-mandated gender-affirming care is a basic right, human right. The slippery slope is real. JC, $10, cool. Appreciate it. We're gonna kind of cruise through some of these.
I got something to say on that because it's relevant to something Dave said. Yeah. So Dave brought up the fact that obviously transitioning is not a silver bullet. Of course, it's not. If you look at like actual studies that people who are trans-friendly will cite, they don't say that. People who will not say that. No one claims that transitioning is a silver bullet. What people say is that what reduces suicide rates is an accepting environment, is people having accepting friends and family. Now, what is having accepting friends and family? It's probably not living in an environment where people think that you're freaks and don't allow you to make decisions for yourself. Transitioning is part of having that agency. It doesn't mean that itself is the silver bullet that reduces it, but certainly clamping down on that is.
Yeah, I'm not going to say like whether your parents are good to you and love you and things like that, and like whether you have people around you who are good and help you, whatever that might mean. I don't think that always means encouraging your delusions, but having good people around you, I certainly would acknowledge that will probably reduce suicidality. But the idea that we're just asserting that the issue is that the environment is so toxic and that's what causes the alarmingly high suicide rate amongst trans people is just doesn't make sense. I mean, I'm sorry,
well, it
but
doesn't make sense to you, but that's
well, hold on. Let me finish the point. No, it doesn't. It doesn't make sense. Period. Jews in the Holocaust did not have as high of a suicide rate as trans people do. Black people in slavery, black people in Jim Crow did not have as high of a suicide rate. For you to just decide that it's the environment is not tolerant of them enough. It just doesn't make sense.
No idea why clamping down on people's agency is supposed to help that.
I
But
didn't
the other
say
thing
that,
I was
though.
going to
But no one
say, the
said
other thing
that.
I was going to
Like,
say,
but you're
is
ignoring the point I make
specifically
because
the
it
thing-
contradicts your
specifically
point.
okay, hold on, Dave. Let me talk. Dave, let me talk. So specifically, the thing that so if you are worried about people making hasty decisions about transitioning, specifically the thing that seems to cut down the most on regret, like actual regret from feeling like you made a hasty decision, which does happen. It's extremely rare, much rarer than you seem to think it is, but it does happen. And what is the thing that seems to cut down on that the most is people seeing the beginnings of seeing themselves as trans, not as therefore I must binary be the other gender, but thinking is a time for gender exploration where I will see if I am instead non-binary or something like that. And if that's the case, then that's what seems to cut down the most on the overly hasty transition regret, which again, extremely rare, but does happen. But specifically, if you're complaining about all this new shit about people saying that they're non-binary and all that, then you are cutting down on the thing that is helping in those exact cases of regret that you are concerned about.
You made your point. Okay, I agree that the more hastily the decision is made, the worse the outcome probably will be. But there's just a lot of like goalpost moving here where you make this claim about the environment. I have a rebuttal to that really kind of blows that up. And now we're moving on to a whole nother thing that I don't accept non-binaries. The truth is that Jews in the Holocaust did not have as high of a suicide rate. Blacks during slavery did not have as high as a suicide rate. Give me a break that the only issue here is that let me just finish a point, Charles. Let me just finish the point. Give me a break that the issue here is that it's an inhospitable environment. This is a mental illness. When you identify as something, you feel deep down inside that what you were born as is so wrong and you were supposed to be something else. It's on the level of people who feel like they're supposed to be like, I don't know, who want to castrate themselves, who want to chop off healthy limbs. There's a psychological issue here. And that doesn't mean we should be shitty to these people. That doesn't mean we should have no humanity for these people. But if three adults here are having a conversation about it, it's not.
I don't know what it means for you
real quick. All right, we need to move on.
That's fine that you don't know. Like that's the point I'm making is that you can't just deduce from that it's because we're not tolerant enough. It's because the environment, like there's just obviously much more deep-seated issues.
While arguing the rise in trans is due to a rise in acceptance, but somehow the suicide rates completely remained unaffected, essentially. But anyways, let's move on. Why can I not sign contract till I'm 18, but I can cut my junk off at 9? Obviously, that's a little bit of a
not 16.
Yeah. All right. These laws.
It's more like turning it inside out, by the way.
Yeah, which you would think would not work the same. But all right, these laws Charles cites seems to put the right for adults to do what they want to themselves at risk. I feel like I feel like I can speak for Dave here. The laws that would in any way affect adults that, you know, aside from, I don't know, maybe different arbitrary things, if for somehow you're preventing an adult from transitioning or assuming there's some doctor willing to do so, I would assume we would be against that. I think it's a retarded decision.
Yeah, but why don't you ever talk about that, I guess, is my...
Well, Jose just said it, so we do talk about it.
Yeah, he said it on this stream after I've been brought it up like a million times, but why do I never see Dave, like, for example, after Jordan Peterson talks about how these criminal doctors should be in prison, say, whoa, this is fucking crazy.
Do you listen to my Charles, do you listen to my show?
No, I don't listen to your show, but I do follow you on Twitter.
But then it's a silly criticism to say, why don't I ever hear Dave talk about this? Because you don't listen to my shit. I remember watching you. I remember seeing you tweet.
I see you talk about trans people on Twitter a hell of a lot.
Okay, fine. But this is silly. If you don't listen to what I do to say, I've only heard you say this and not that. I remember a while back you tweeted out something where you go, how come Dave only talks about the culture war stuff and never talks about libertarianism? And it's like, dude, I don't know. You don't watch my shit. So yes, I've specifically I don't talk about this trans stuff that much. I was saying to Jose before we did this debate, I was like, oh my God, am I actually going to do a debate about this? When I talk about it, usually what I say is I think this whole thing is a fucking distraction that powerful people love, because I'd much rather just be talking about wars and central banks and police states and mass incarceration and shit like that. But yes, I have said many times, there shouldn't be any laws that restrict adults from having surgeries that a doctor is willing to perform for them. Adults, fine. But also, I can recognize that what Jordan Peterson said, if you actually listen to it and want to give him a charitable interpretation, is he was making the point, and I think there's a reasonable argument to this, not that I think it should be forced by law, but that doctors shouldn't do it. And that in the same sense that, like, if you were to go and say, like, hey, I identify as a person without legs, And I've always known I'm a person without legs, and I want to be a person without legs. And the doctor just went, cool, no
So that's
problem.
your reading
50
of
G's.
these criminal
50
doctors
Gs.
should be held accountable.
Yes, he explained this in detail.
Incredible.
And yes, that is exactly what he meant. He explained it in detail, okay? And what he said is that he goes, in a sense, he said it's not illegal. And I'm not even necessarily saying it should be illegal, but all of the greatest atrocities throughout human history were not necessarily illegal. And in a sense, a doctor being willing to cut off completely healthy limbs for elective reasons is in some sense like criminal. And I'm not saying it should be illegal, but I would be like, I would completely understand if doctors in like a better society were like, yeah, we're not cutting off healthy limbs. Like, we don't just do elective surgeries like this for no legitimate reason. So that was kind of the point he was making. And by the way, I've made the point that you're criticizing me for not making. It's just, you don't listen to my shit. And so then for you to say, I've never heard you say this, just isn't a fair criticism.
All right, let's we got to keep moving. I do want to address that question for me that you brought up. The reason I don't bring up that, I don't know, 23-year-old trans people may not be able to transition in Oklahoma or whatever is because, to be completely frank, I don't give a flying fuck. Like, if you ask me on my position, I'll be like, yeah, I don't think they should do that. But am I going to go out of my way to make a point of it? I'm sorry. There's certain issues I care about more than others, and I'm sorry.
That doesn't register.
My point is that the Mises Caucus crowd fundamentally is only like not necessarily believes, but only cares about liberty in those areas where it accords at least reasonably well with the whatever is the right-wing culture war thing of the week.
This is again. It sounds like you
doesn't
discussing.
Matter if,
right. It sounds like you discussing. It sounds like you discussing my opinion and then admitting that you don't listen to my show. If you think that the Mises Caucus crowd doesn't care about wars and Austrian economics and central banking and all of this stuff,
the right wing culture war stuff.
What, dude, this is the thing that you guys have a problem with, is you see us as culture warriors, but you don't see yourself as one. And you don't realize that you're on the left side of this culture war and that this whole podcast has demonstrated that perfectly. Yes, you are. You're a culture warrior too.
He's admitting it, Dave.
Oh, okay, fine. So you're a culture warrior too. Fine.
Yeah, but I care about liberty in areas that go against that nominally go against my culture war position.
So do we.
I get pretty fucking furious at lefties who are straight up, I will say it, bigoted against homeschooled people. Okay. Those like the trans issue and the homeschooled issue are probably the two issues currently that I get the most genuinely, emotively, viscerally angry about.
Okay, fine.
Because
so, like, but what do you think I don't challenge?
Throwing people under the bus because of their cultural bigotry.
Okay, so let me, I mean, I don't know exactly what issue to pick, but fuck all the right-wingers and their warmongering with China. That shit is fucking retarded. China's not a threat to America at all. Fuck all the right, Donald Trump's a war criminal. Like, what else? I don't know. What cultural issue you want me to talk about? Name a fucking issue. Like, the idea that the Mises
most of them you're
Caucus...
bad on, but...
What?
I mean, a lot of them you're bad on, so it would...
We're bad on what? What cultural issue am I bad on?
Well, that's what I'm saying is that you're obviously going to disagree. You're bad on it, but like,
well, yeah, of course,
like,
but
we probably shouldn't throw it out.
Abortion, the trans kids, the issue with trans kids that we've been talking about.
Yeah, yes,
immigration.
Yes,
all
you're
of these
right.
are
I don't
things
think
where you're
so. That's it. I'm a culture warrior. I don't think children can consent, and I don't think you should be able to kill babies inside the womb. Okay, fine, but there's a complete libertarian like argument to that. And by the way,
if you squint, sure. Just like if you squint, there's
we think the same thing about your position. You get how we're arguing an arbitrary
like just saying you're squinting isn't an argument. It's like, no, I can actually make an argument to back up all of these things and to make the claim that the Mises Caucus does not care about. Dude, the first thing when we took over the party was a major push to get behind the Yemen War Powers Act. Then it was organizing the fucking anti-war rally about the war in Ukraine. Then I'm sure you can pick out problems with all of this shit, but to act like this is like that all we care about is culture war shit, you got to squint, dude. You got to squint real fucking hard to pretend that the Mises Caucus doesn't care about anti-war and Austrian economics.
All right, let's keep moving. Let's keep moving. All right, Dave, has Rogan told you not to talk to Owen Benjamin? Please go on his stream. I'd love to hear you discuss And the Fed. He likes you, no homo. Real quick, he's coming on Tower Gang tomorrow, so we'll probably do have some unhinged rant about why Dave sucks from Owen. I don't know. But
I don't think Owen's gonna have a rant about how I suck. I fucking listen, man. Rogan's never once told me not to have a guest on, and I don't know. For people who know me, if you think like as much as I love Joe and like admire him, if you think he told me to not have someone on and I wouldn't have them on for that reason, that's like, I don't know. You don't know me. I love Owen. I haven't talked to him for a long time. Owen could fucking give me a call. He's got my number, man. Like, I don't know. We haven't talked in a while. I don't it's there. I know that it's like if somebody out there, if you have like if you have two friends and one of your friend is like going real hard at the other friend and you think it's like, he's a little out of pocket for doing that. And he's posting videos of like his father and go like, that's kind of not cool. That means I'm like, oh, I'm cucking to what Rogan wants or something like that. I just think is silly. But I love Owen. He's a fucking really, really smart dude and a fucking hilarious comedian who has gone down every fucking rabbit hole, I think, in the last few years. So I don't know.
All right, Dave, the Gray Zone confronted Jamal Bowman on the Ukraine war. He supports funding, but didn't know what Crimea was. It's on their homepage. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
I'll check it out. I don't know.
Yeah. Can Charles cite a single part of a bill, not just say that they do, that stops an adult transgender from living as they want besides the bathrooms? And if you got anything offhand, I mean, it's pretty specific.
Okay, can you read that again? I didn't.
Yeah. By the way, I don't really feel like we should necessarily hold it against you if you don't know a specific bill. But I mean, whatever. Can you cite a single part of a bill, not just say that they do, that stops an adult transgender from living as they want besides the bathrooms?
I mean, I said the thing just off the top of my head, the Florida bill that bans you from getting hormones from at any age, getting hormones from a nurse practitioner, which is 80% of how trans people are getting their hormones. That's bans most trans people from getting hormones. I mean, that just got overturned, but that's off the top of my head.
That's the one that was just overturned, right?
Yeah, like today, I think.
Yeah, literally.
Actually, no, it hasn't been overturned. The children's part got overturned, but the reasoning it obviously applies. So as soon as
only give it to kids. So it's only the adults are restricted now.
That is correct. Yes. Yeah.
Well, that's
we can all agree. We can all agree that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
All right, Dave. Thoughts on all the big political names going to Pork Fest this month? I'm sure you're going to say they're wonderful.
Who I know RFK is going. Who else is going?
I think Maj, Scott Horton. I don't know. I could give you some smaller names.
Maj and Scott, those are my guys. So that's awesome. They're being there. I thought RFK going was a real interesting thing, and I think people are being unfair about like Pork Fest. I don't even know what agreement they came to. I'm not going to be able to make it this year, but the thing about there not being guns around or something, and they're like, oh, Pork Fest is cucking, and you're like, dude, they're making a voluntary agreement. This isn't actually anti-liberty, and he is a Kennedy running for president. You know, you can understand why it's a little sensitive to just have a crowd full of people holding guns. I like, to me, I was just like, I kind of get that request. I think he's a really interesting guy, and it's a very interesting campaign that he's running. I really loved the other day in that Twitter Spaces that he came out and really was great on China and just how we should stop this like war posturing with them, and how we should just kind of be in an economic competition with them.
All right. Abrogate Authoritarians. He's one of my sponsors. $20. Appreciate it, bud. You don't have to do all that. Sterilizing via medication we previously reserved for repeat sex offenders is a good example of an irreversible change. All right. Logic Rex. Curious as to what Charles thinks about the rising rate of detransitioners. Because I know you brought that point up earlier.
I mean, like I said, like vast majority of detransitioners, it's only a very, very small number who it's because they actually think that transitioning was in principle the wrong thing to do. Usually it's because of they feel like that transitioning more, making it more obvious that they're trans is making things harder for them socially. But even for the small number where there's they really do feel like it was that they got into things too hastily, that number seems to basically go away when you consider people who are asked to explore gender rather than assuming that being trans has to be a binary trans thing. When you bring in the non-binary, all the stuff Dave would call new shit, that seems to go away.
All right, we got one last one from old PDQ, Pete Quinones of the Pete Quinones Show. Ask him his opinion of the January 6th protesters, and I'm obviously assuming that's going to be directed at you, Charles.
Oh, I'm shocked. Yeah,
Heroes,
I mean,
every one of them.
I don't think anybody should be president. I don't think that the Congress or the Capitol building or whatever, I think it has no sacred status to me. I think it's bad to try to reinstall a president. I mean, but also I think people shouldn't be in prison. I'm a prison abolitionist. That includes people I think are much worse than January 6th, people at the January 6th. I think that if you're doing stuff that's kind of crazy, you should probably hide your identity a little better than the January 6th protesters. But that's neither here nor there about how they should be treated after the fact.
Well, all right. I know we had talked about hit another topic, but we're really late in the tooth here, and I do have shit to do, and I know Dave probably has to get going too. So if you guys, I guess we'll start with Dave. Or actually, we'll start with Charles. I don't know if you have anything you want to promote. Now would be time, or you can give us a real quick, if you want to, a closing statement, like 2 minutes range kind of deal.
Yeah. So I'll just say the thing that we talked about talking about earlier, which we didn't get to, which was just that. I think this whole thing is kind of a microcosm of what radical critics of the Mises Caucus have in mind, because it's not just the Prague Caucus and all that. It's plenty of people who are radical libertarians are upset about whether you want to say there's a libertarian argument for it. People like Dave taking the position the government should be involved more than the standard libertarian position on immigration, on abortion, on trans related issues. Just down the line, if there's at all an argument about whether this could be, you could change the standard libertarian view on, and there's a way to make it more statist than more state involvement in a right-wing way. That's the way that a lot of the people go. And it's not clear. So it's clear to me why someone would vote libertarian instead of Republican or Democrat. It's not clear to me why someone would vote Green instead of Democrat, because obviously if you're Green, you think the Democrats are just down the line better than the Republicans, and the ways they're bad are at least not as bad as Republicans. Not clear to me why the Mises Caucus version of libertarianism, why that doesn't start to look similar for the Republicans. Not saying that you are Republicans. That's stupid. I agree. But it's not clear why it's not just a slight why there's a similar thing that doesn't hold. And in general, it can't be Ron Paul 2.0 when the whole point of Ron Paul was kind of lay down your arms in the culture war, this cooperative ethos, when from day one, goal of the Mises Caucus seems to be libertarian infighting. And even this late into the takeover, notably called a takeover, that there's still all this talk about other libertarians, et cetera, et cetera. It's not, there's a lot of it is not the kind of focus you would expect for a Ron Paul 2.0 of bringing people together to take on the state. And I think that's a fundamental thing that you need to come to terms with.
All right, Dave, and you can promote whatever you got to, and then give a little quick closing.
Look, man, the libertarian infighting, I guess it's always existed to some degree. Although for me, during the Ron Paul days, I really didn't think it was that high. Not in the Libertarian Party. The movement at that point was in the Republican Party. The libertarian infighting really started with the previous regime trying to character assassinate Ron Paul and Lou Rockwell and Jeff Deist and Tom Woods and all of these great people who many of us consider heroes. And that activated a lot of us to join the party to take it over. And we did overwhelmingly. And the fact that the libertarian infighting has continued since then, you could lay that at the feet of the Mises Caucus, but believe me, if we had lost, it's not as if there wouldn't be a lot of people leaving the party or a lot of people upset or that infighting wouldn't have continued. And so, whatever. In terms of uniting people to take on the state, yeah, that's the challenge. And certainly the old guard wasn't successful at doing it, and we have not been yet, but that's our challenge, and that's what we're here to do. The idea that I think that, look, we all have our biases, and we all come to this with our priors. But it is interesting to me that the people who think all the Mises Caucus cares about are the culture wars, I think are the ones who are really allergic to the fact that the Mises Caucus is divorcing libertarianism from all this woke shit. That is not a part of it, is not deduced from our first principles, and there's no reason why we should attach ourselves to it. You know, you made the point about, like, why would a Green vote against the Democrat, or why would someone, you know, a Mises Caucus type vote against the Republicans? The truth is, why would anyone who believes in any of this woke shit even be looking for a radical or alternative to the system? I mean, your views on transgenderism, Charles, you got like political parties behind you. You got every major corporation behind you. You got all of Hollywood behind you. You have incredible, powerful institutions. Even the ones you hate are all trying to push this same message. The CIA and Raytheon are running commercials about how inclusive they are to trans people. So I think there's the type of people who are going to be dissidents against this regime are far more likely to be to find it appealing if we divorce ourselves from this stuff, which I think we should. The idea that the Mises Caucus is not committed to the anti-war message, to abolishing central banks, to abolishing state control on all types of different levels, you'd have to just not be paying attention at all to what any.
I agree with that
people...
last point. Just to be clear, I agree with you on the last point.
Okay.
That's not my issue.
Okay, well, you'd have to not be paying attention to not see that all of the influential people within the Mises Caucus and the Mises Caucus adjacent kind of groups are all completely on board with that. And the idea that we're just like only concerned with culture war issues, it's not reality. I don't know. It's a caricature of us, in fact. And I've been on record as saying RFK is my favorite presidential candidate right now from the major parties. We're the people who are out there arguing. I'm the guy who's on Fox News saying Donald Trump should be locked in jail for war crimes and that he should never be forgiven for, giving America Fauci for all of 2020. We are very different than the Republicans in many ways. And the truth is, and this is, I'll leave on this, but it's something that really is interesting that flies in the face of this narrative that's painted about the Mises Caucus. But the truth is that despite the paleo libertarians who hate us for this and the people pursuing the paleo strategy, the Mises Caucus was basically made up of a bunch of people like myself who joined the Republican Party only because of the Ron Paul campaigns of 2008 and 2012. I was never a Republican. I joined them to vote against the Republicans to vote for Ron Paul. And we left in 2016 when the Rand Paul campaign collapsed and Donald Trump won. And we realized this wasn't a home for us and we needed somewhere else to be. So we've had a year here with this Mises Caucus project. We got a lot of work to do. I'm certainly not denying that. But the idea that because we don't think kids can consent and abortion is libertarian, I don't think discounts any of that other stuff. I will say, I know I apologize if I got a little bit heated during this whole thing. I do very much appreciate Charles coming in here into the lion's den to some degree and having this exchange. So you've earned my respect, sir. And thank you, Jose, for hosting us. Very quickly, very quickly. I was talking to a friend of mine and I told him when I was going down to Tampa and I was like, oh, I got a crew of my friends coming out. And I mentioned Jose was coming out and he goes, oh, he's the OKC guy, right? So I thought I'd tell you that. That's pretty cool. You're like known as that now. They go, oh, he's the guy who told me about OKC. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I had a lot of autists trying to grab my ear in that tight little area. It's like, I don't really have the time to give a rundown to each one of you individually, but it was nice. It was a great time. I like just people go check out your show. I do want to echo the sentiment. It was cool for you to come here, Charles. I did try to do my best to be unbiased. I know I got a little bit involved at the end. I couldn't hold my tongue any longer, but I do want to let you guys know if you do want to check out more of my work, I just had a piece published, my Kenneth Trentadue Didn't Kill Himself piece published in Garrison magazine, the Journal of History and Deep Politics. Also, Richard Booth is in that one as well. So go check that out. I'll probably put that in the video description tonight or tomorrow. If you want to find an easier way to get it. But yeah, if you want to follow me on Twitter at TowerGangJose, this is the No Way Jose show. YouTube, all major odd pocket Jose as well. Probably dropping all the other stuff tomorrow because it's already late. But you can find on YouTube right now. Shit around, all that good stuff. Thanks for everyone coming. And with that, we are out.